Welcome to, our third edition, I believe, of our Awareness Mondays. I'm Kati, I'm your host, and I'm excited to talk about today's topic, which I will get to in a moment. It's self-compassion, the medicine for our own inner critical voices. But before we get there, I'm just going to wait for a few moments. Perhaps more people will jump online. And I'm just going to see, because I can see the video quality is not quite. Okay. Yes, and also we will be I'll be answering all the questions from last week and any questions that arise this week. I will answer that this week. So just so you know, we didn't do a question answer video last week, but that will happen this week. So it'll be an extended Q&A video incorporating your questions from last week and this week. So that's going to be exciting. All right. So today's topic is self-compassion. And I am very compassionate about this topic because it's a topic that most of us, if not all of us, are struggling or finding this challenging. And the reason for that is because it requires for us to step into this space where we treat ourselves in a compassionate, loving, kind, and gentle way, despite what's happening in our lives, despite what's going on, despite our failures, despite our suffering and pain. So it basically challenges us to be loving to ourselves anyways. And oftentimes, that's why it's a challenge, when we do face difficult times or challenges or conflicts, inner conflicts, or conflicts with our loved ones or people around us, the default is we're going into a very devastating, harsh, inner critical dialogue about ourselves and how we're not being good enough. And that's basically the opposite of self-compassion. And to gauge your own level or capacity of self-compassion at the moment, it's a good practice is to kind of like imagine that scenario. And I usually do that when I'm working with my clients in my psychologist practice, and we tap into this topic and energy of self-compassion. What I often have my clients do is imagine how you would talk to a loved one, a good friend, a family member, when they come to you struggling with something or going through a rough patch. So how do you engage with them? And you can actually really visualize that for a moment. What do you say to them? What do you say to a really close friend when they're going through a hard time? What's your body language towards them? And how does it feel when you visualize that, talking to a good friend and encouraging them? And I really invite you to just for a moment do that. See yourself, how you react, how you engage with them. And then change of scenery. Now think about a challenge that you've been going through, maybe recently or in the past, and just for a moment reflect how you've been engaging with yourself. Now, that can be all sorts of, that doesn't have to be a big challenge, but maybe even, one that I can relate to is being late, not being on time. Um, yeah, or procrastination, or not, having let other people down, that sort of thing. So just think for a moment about a challenge that you've been going through, and yeah, recall how you treated yourself, how you've been talking to yourself, and see what feelings come up and what you can feel in your body when you connect with that. And I would imagine most of you would say, yes, there's definitely a difference between these two scenarios. Yeah. And many of you probably say, when I visualize that scenario with my friend, with my loved one, whoever you visualized, um, you would probably say I was being very empathetic and kind and gentle and encouraging and forgiving and, yeah, compassionate. And then the other scenario, when we actually, going through a challenge ourselves, it's oftentimes super critical and harsh and self-conscious. Yeah, and just not, well, the opposite of compassion, of being compassionate and gentle and kind to ourselves. And this is what even makes it worse. We have that challenge. We all have challenges and ups and downs and rough patches in our lives. And on top of that, we're beating ourselves up and actually not giving ourselves um, the permission to extract the gist of, yeah, the challenges we're going through, and integrating them into our wisdom, basically. So so having said that, self-compassion is, it's not only a tool, it's actually a way of being. It's a different way of engaging with ourselves. Yeah, instead of that, inner critical, harsh, devastating dialogue that we all know. We all have, to a certain extent, this inner critical voice, or, most of the time, we have several critical voices inside of us that tell us all sorts of things about ourselves. And there's so many areas we can actually, you know, beat ourselves up. And the resource or capacity of self compassion is to alleviate or soothe those voices inside of us. Um, so I want to go through three main components or aspects of self compassion. It's just like a little compass, basically, um, and that will also help you to tune into that energy of self compassion and to build up this resource so that, going forward from here, it'll be easier for you to actually connect with practicing. I have tools I can practice self-compassion, or being more compassionate towards myself, more accepting and compassionate towards myself. So there's a beautiful researcher and author. Her name is Christine Neff, and she's done amazing work on the subject of self-compassion. And she distinguishes three main components that all together kind of like, create or have the potency to create this state of self-compassion within ourselves. And that's mindfulness, that's the first one. Common humanity, that's the second one. And the third one is loving kindness. So it's mindfulness, um, common humanity, and loving kindness. And I'm going to just explain and introduce those three components, which will also give you a little bit of, an opportunity to check in, where am I at in those different categories. Where am I at, and what's already coming to me in an easy manner, and what is maybe more challenging for me, or what, what haven't I looked at all so far within myself. So mindfulness basically is that act of acknowledging. Yeah, and I've talked about that before in the previous videos. Um, it always starts with this awareness. What is actually going on? That acknowledgement versus just only engaging or getting all wrapped up in this inner critical self-talk. Okay, acknowledging that's what's happening at the moment, and that's that moment of presence and mindfulness. Yeah, so instead of really getting entangled or hooked by all those, thoughts and beliefs that we carry within ourselves that are not beneficial for us, it's this moment of, okay, um, that's what it is. That's how I feel. These are my thoughts. And there are many practices, and tools, how you can build up and train your own inner mindfulness muscle. Yeah, there's a whole mindfulness-based meditation toolbox that you can access on resources like YouTube, or on meditation apps, to practice that, to practice every day being more present with what's happening within you, what's happening around you. And it doesn't have to be, I always say that, oftentimes people go, I already have so much going on in my life, and everything that comes on top of it is just another, you know, hassle basically. And I don't have the capacity, I don't have the time to do that. So it's not necessarily that you have to add heaps of meditation practices on top of it, but simply, practicing being present with the things that you're anyway doing over the course of your day. Yeah, food and eating is a good area to practice that. Yeah, being more in the moment with what you're eating, how fast or slow you're eating, the taste, that sort of thing. It's a simple area. But even the breath, and that's where it usually always starts, every now and then over the course of the day, checking in with your breath and just noticing what's the quality and the depth of my breath. Is it more in my chest or my belly? So these are just really, the list is long for those mindfulness-based practices, and I'm pretty sure we will jump into that in another video a bit more in depth. But for this purpose here today, mindfulness is a skill, but again, also it's a state of being that we can all practice. And it's actually simple to practice that, because the moment when you shine your light on something and you focus on something, you are present with that. Yeah? You're aware. And that's that first element of, building up that resource of self-compassion. I need to be aware that I'm, for example, overly critical, self-conscious about myself, about my body, about my report, about my project, whatever it is, about what I said to this person, to my friend, or family member or partner. So that's the first step, noticing that and realizing that's what I'm doing. And then a very pivotal, I'd say, next step is that component of common humanity. So oftentimes when we go through challenges, we kind of like think we're the only ones on this planet Earth that feel that way. And that kind of like can tap us into this, victim mode of poor me. um, and oftentimes triggers us to go into an isolation, or the other extreme is to seek a lot of reassurance and confirmation from others in the state of, being the victim, poor me. So there's these two extremes, either total isolation and shutting down and, keeping other people at bay, or, going into this, seeking approval and confirmation and soothing from other people in an excessive way. And sometimes, we might be a mix of both, could be sometimes either way. So common humanity, this tool or component of self-compassion is the realization that, well, you know, we as humans, well, life is not perfect and we are not perfect. And that's exactly how it is meant to be. And, there's a lot of conditioning when we tap into, what's in a successful life, for example. And that's really worthwhile in terms of this, acknowledgement. Suffering is part of living. You can kind of like check in with yourself how that feels inside of you, saying that to yourself. And, you know, even I can feel there is resistance within me, we just don't want that. We don't want to acknowledge that. But as a matter of fact, if you look around you, if you look at your own life, um, there's no such life like a challenge-free, perfect, whatever that means, life. And there's so much conditioning around successful lives and how it needs to be, how we need to be in order to succeed, in order to feel happy, in order to feel successful and achieving and accomplished in life, that we have created this illusion that when we fail or when something doesn't quite go our way, that that equals an unsuccessful life, and we take that as as evidence that we are not worthy enough, that we're not good enough. So that component of common humanity is basically the embracing of the reality that life is part of suffering, and suffering is part of life. Life is part of suffering. Hopefully not only. Suffering is part of life, or going through challenging, conflicting times is part of life. And that doesn't mean we're not being successful with what we're doing, we're not being good enough, and that other people are actually going through, similar challenges. And it's not so much about comparing um, who's suffering more, who's more in pain, but it is just more that, eh, cultivating that acceptance. Okay, just only because I'm not quite where I want to be, or just only because I'm feeling very vulnerable, and for many that equals weak, and that's not acceptable, doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong. It's just part of this human experience, and this journey that we're all on as we are alive. And for many, that can be a very relieving reminder. Yeah, so this is not something new as such, but it is a reminder that can help to alleviate that intensity of suffering when we go through hard times. Yeah, so we had the mindfulness, which is, that was the first component, versus, over identification with whatever, painful thoughts and feelings go on. And we have the common humanity versus that state of isolation and, isolating ourselves away from others, by thinking we're the only ones who go through this, or we're the only ones who feel in that intense, deep way. So what's the third component? Remember I said there's three. So the third one is the act of kindness or loving kindness, um, versus self-judgment. So that's basically when we can tap into action mode and, you know, ask ourselves, well, what would it be that suits me right now in this moment? So that is tapping into the the topic of needs and self-care again. I mean, you know, self-compassion anyways is a form of self-care, if anything. But particularly this area of the loving kindness. Um, and I mentioned that before as well. What is my loving action, my step towards soothing, softening, and alleviating whatever is going on within me? And, you know, that can be all sorts of small and big acts. That can be saying no to something that you have said yes before all the time, but actually, you know, wasn't good for you. Yeah, saying no to certain people and spending time with them. Maybe saying no to a particular type of work task or projects that just overwhelm you, if you can. Um, Making little small adjustments in your lifestyle and the way you deal with your own time and space for yourself. So these, are just really small examples that can help you to say, okay, how can I tap into? But even more important, maybe not more important, but as important as, taking those loving steps towards yourself is practical tools how to reframe this inner critical self-talk. So really sitting down, and after this, process of, okay, I'm acknowledging what's happening. I can see my thoughts, I can see, and I can feel that they're not good for me, or that they're putting me down. They don't feel good. And I'm tapping into that soothing and softening moment of, okay, I know that I'm not alone. I know that, this is part of that, well, human experience on earth. So, and that's the kindness that comes in now. So how can I cultivate a more gentle, loving inner self-talk? So, words like, well, may I be kind to myself? May I learn to accept myself just the way I am? Maybe sometimes, may I accept myself just the way I might be too big? Might still create a lot of resistance within us. So what would we say to a good friend, to a loved one, is basically a good, template or script for what we can say to ourselves. May I be kind to myself. May I be strong. May I be soft. May I just allow things to flow more easily. So it's basically you're you're starting to tap into your wishes to yourself in a way that whatever you would wish for a good friend. And it takes practice. It doesn't always come easily in the beginning, because oftentimes the hurdle or barrier of inner judgment, critical harsh voices mm, can be very, very high and thick and strong. So jumping over that hurdle can feel very challenging and difficult at times. However, it's worthwhile practicing building up this resource of self compassion because it does alleviate anxiety, it does alleviate perfectionism, it does soften, that urge that we need to do everything right and perfect. It gives us more motivation and choice, basically, as well. And wherever there's choice, wherever we can actually see the choices in our lives, that gives us power. So, if anything, cultivating this resource of self-compassion, engaging in a more gentle and kind way with ourselves, um, empowers us to see life and ourselves in a different light, in a more passionate, motivating light. Um, and people who actually make an effort to cultivate this resource, to build up that skill, um, oftentimes say they get more energy, they feel more energized and vital because all this inner self-talk that is critical and judgmental takes up a lot of headspace and energy within us. It drains us, it exhausts us, and that's oftentimes when we feel so burned out because we keep spiraling over and over again um, on on topics that where we feel we did something wrong or not good enough. So when we learn to let go of that by actually cultivating a more beneficial, soft inner dialogue, we get more energy and all of a sudden we have more to give and to offer to the world. And that's where this motivation comes in as well. We feel much more motivated um, to be present and to show up. So if anything, it's actually because oftentimes people have that blockage of, oh, but what if I'm being selfish? Am I actually allowed to say no and to others and yes to myself? Um, Oftentimes we actually have more energy and more passion and compassion and love to give, or the more compassionate we are with ourselves. And there's a beautiful saying, and I want to wrap that up. This talk today up with the saying from the one and only Buddha, and he said, if your compassion doesn't include yourself, it's not complete. And I think this is just a beautiful reminder that, building up a more gentle, compassionate self-talk actually takes ourselves into the equation. And if anything, that this is our life, this is our time. If we're not in the equation, whose life is this? Yeah. So, yeah, for this week, um, I invite you to have a bit of a look, at these three components and different areas, that mindfulness, common humanity, and loving kindness, and see if you, in your day-to-day routine, can take some steps towards being more present with yourself, towards reminding yourself that you're not the only one on earth who feels um, low, sad, or unworthy at times, and to practice a more gentle and encouraging inner self-talk. Yeah, I'm super excited to hear about how you're going, and until Wednesday you have the opportunity to just, ask any questions around that topic of self-compassion, and how you're going. And then I'll be happy to answer these questions. And until then, have a wonderful rest of the day. Enjoy the sun, whether she's shining or not. um, she'll be shining in your heart. See you soon. Bye.